And we do these once a month on the third Thursday, but I'm going to tell you about a couple more in 10 days. On September 28th, we're rattling the cages of the news media here in Ames, and we have invited the new editor of the Tribune, the editor of the Iowa State Daily, Mel Crippen, KHOI, and Lynn Carey, Michael Bouchea, who is in the Greenlee School of Journalism, and Susan Guiasta, who is the communications person with the city. They are going to do a panel discussion on how do we get our news out to people in Ames. How does the city, they need people to make announcements and give opinions on things that are happening. So, you know, we've got a problem and we want to solve it, so, or see what we can do. So that is September 28th. So it is here in the auditorium. We're expecting a fairly large crowd that night, so that'll be fun. The next thing we will do in a month on the third Thursday, John's going to do the program on the Second Amendment constitutional for the vote on November 8th. It's a gun amendment, and we want to make sure people know how to vote on that and, you know, support that. So as a league, we're asking people to vote no on it because we want to make sure that we can still have laws on gun safety. So, you know, that is a very educational program. Make sure you're registered to vote at your current address. If you've moved someplace or if you know a next door neighbor, we have the forms here. You can do that. And you can now request your absentee ballot request form, and you can track that form at the auditor's office. After it's sent in, they will have you registered as we've received your request, and then that will be mailed on October 19th. Or if you don't like to do that, you can do satellite voting in those 20 days prior. We'll have satellite for the 2 Saturdays prior to the election, and we've got some flyers on that. So I will let you, John, introduce Dan. He gets to introduce Dan. Oh, one more thing. Barb gave out some surveys. We want to check and see what people want to know about what's going on in Ames and things like that, and what you want to be educated on. We'd like to educate Ames. So fill out the survey. Tell us how you found out about this tonight. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming, for sure. We do a program every month, as Carolyn said. We call it Learn with the League. And tonight we're going to learn about soil and water, the 2 most important things to making Iowa the beautiful land that it is, and also what is essential to the strong agrarian economy that Iowa has always had something they can rely on. So soil and water will be presented by Dan Haug, who is an educator and an organizer for Prairie Rivers of Iowa. And he will talk about the things that we are concerned about with respect to soil and water. I just have to mention, I saw a black and white film a while back of a creek in Iowa, and you could just tell it was clear. You could see the bottom of the creek, and you knew that there were fish in there, and if there were, you could see it, and you could catch them, and you wouldn't be afraid to eat them. And so that water was certainly fishable, probably swimmable, and quite possibly drinkable. But I don't think there's a stream in Iowa that you would say that about today. So we have Dan here to tell us what's happening, what we can do to help. And so that's it. Take it away, Dan.
Hi. So I'm Dan Haug. My title is Water Quality Specialist. I work for Prairie Rivers of Iowa, which is a nonprofit in Ames. So I was asked to talk about soil and water issues. One disclaimer, I'm probably not the best person to ask if you're wondering what's being talked about on the campaign trail or what might be happening in the next legislative session. There are other organizations, other environmental organizations that do track bills and that have policy papers. The Iowa Environmental Council is one. Our group is really more locally focused. We're kind of a project incubator, and we build local partnerships. So our two main programs, we're a resource conservation and development. There used to be a lot of these around the state serving a 6-county area, and they were housed out of the Natural Resource Conservation Office, and they would do conservation and rural development projects. And there's a few left, Golden Hills and Northeast Iowa and Pathfinders and a few others, but a lot of them have kind of gone out of business as the funding dried up. But anyway, so our two main programs are, we manage the Lincoln Highway Heritage Byway, doing historic preservation and interpretation along that historic road and promoting the businesses and attractions along it. And then we've done a lot of conservation projects, the Iowa Creek and South Skunk River watershed in Boone, Story, and Hamilton counties. So I think that's kind of given me a perspective on, I may not know what issues are being talked about on the campaign trail, but I know what issues matter in the stream. So a lot of what I do is education and outreach. We had a big project working on the Iowa Creek watershed, what used to be called Squaw Creek, and doing field days to work with farmers, educate folks about conservation practices like reconstructed wetlands and cover crops. We've partnered with Story County Conservation to put up signs marking the watershed boundaries to get people thinking, oh, I'm up on a hill, but that drains to the creek, or hey, I never thought about what the name of this creek is I'm driving over. Hopefully get people thinking a little bit about our local streams and lakes. We do a lot of community events. We do videos and educational materials. And lately we've been focusing a lot on water monitoring. This was something where the Department of Natural Resources used to have a citizen science program, and then that ended, and so we were, had a lot of local groups that wanted to be testing our local creeks and find out what was going on, and so we were helping to get all the stakeholders together and put together a monitoring plan and a monitoring program. And so what we found through that is that there's a lot of confusion about what the issues are, especially at the local level. So that's hopefully what I can shed some light on tonight. Some of what we run into is some of what's being talked about isn't really that important an issue. Some things are important issues but not locally relevant. Sometimes it's not clear if there's a local connection. Sometimes it's a local issue, but we don't have the tools to address it at the local level. And sometimes we're just confused what issue we're talking about. Water, there's a lot of things that go into it. So go into some of this. One of the first things that I was charged with when I started working at Prairie Rivers of Iowa 5 years ago is we were trying to organize some town hall meetings to start a watershed management authority. And one of the stakeholders, one of the elected officials that we wanted to participate in that group was saying, hey, I don't want anything to do with water. My constituents are all riled up about this waters of the United States controversy, and I'm not going to have anything to do with it until we see how the Trump administration is going to handle it. So we've had this kind of back and forth about what waters are jurisdictional under the Clean Water Act, and so initially a lot of concern from the agricultural community about puddles and fields being regulated, and then a reversal from Obama to Trump, and a lot of environmental organizations worrying about all the streams losing their protections, and then a reversal. And from my perspective, having looked at these kinds of permits before in a previous job, really all that's being affected is if you're a developer and you're going to be moving some earth to fill a wetland, then this might, and that's an isolated wetland that's not directly connected to a stream, this might affect whether you have to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. And all the other stuff seemed to be a lot of, it was dealing with things that were already exempt. So there's just a lot of this kind of stuff where, a great deal of worry and talk about things that don't really have any practical importance, at least in Iowa. Now, it may not have mattered that much whether this particular county supervisor came on board with this group, because it turns out that watershed management authorities don't have any money or power the way they were set up in Iowa. It still can be an excellent way to get the stakeholders together and get people talking and thinking, and certainly it's led to some good collaboration between the city of Ames and the county and Boone County, and so there's some good that comes out of it, but there are some limitations. And the individual members of this watershed group, the cities, the counties, the soil and water districts, what we found is that they often are pretty limited on what they can do on their own, even if you get them together. So there are, state laws preventing cities or counties from regulating fertilizer sales, really limiting what they can do on review of confined animal feeding operations, that master matrix process. There's a credible data law that, even though we've been collecting water quality data in Story County, that limits what the DNR can do with it. So we're kind of finding that there really are, although there are things that you can do at the local level, there are some limitations as well. A lot of what's getting talked about in Iowa is the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. And that's certainly an important issue, and it's a way that we in Iowa can make a difference for fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's something that we really have a responsibility to do. But I think there's been a missed opportunity sometimes to make the connection to how will these actions benefit Iowans. What we've been finding as we do water monitoring is that there's a whole suite of other issues besides nitrogen and phosphorus that affect water quality, and sometimes we're too focused on the nitrogen and we're missing the rest of them. Now, we're doing watershed management plans, and supposedly, you'd think that you'd learn, what the local connections are. And what we found as we got into this is that, we're trying to take data from DNR databases, and it gets really confusing. So here's the, lovely named Long Dick Creek in Hamilton County. It is on the impaired waters list for high levels of E. coli, so that you're not safe to swim in it. It's on the impaired waters list for a low fish index, so the fish aren't doing well. And then there were fish kills caused by pesticides and animal waste. But as we kind of dug into this, trying to understand, okay, is this one we should focus on? We see, okay, it's a presumed impairment for a presumptive use. So it turns out that this is really more of a drainage ditch. There isn't enough water to float a canoe, so do these standards really apply? And they haven't calibrated the index, so we're not really sure how to interpret the fish survey they did. And they looked into this fish kill and decided there was nothing they could really do about it. So there's just a lot of this this kind of stuff where you dig into it and you're left scratching your head like, okay, what's really the issue here? And I think the reason for that is that the DNR's database are all built around compliance with the Clean Water Act, which had this goal of fishable, swimmable rivers, and this is going to be hard to read. Fishable, swimmable rivers, and they delegated that responsibility to the state. So there's this one piece of the Clean Water Act is this kind of process for a river by river and lake by lake cleanup. So first of all, you ask the question, well, if the river was clean, could you swim in it? Could you fish in it? And so that's the designated use. And you might say, well, doesn't really have enough water for swimming, but secondary contact recreation, you could do shore fishing. And so that's the designated use. Then you ask, how clean does it need to be for swimming? And that's the water quality criteria. So those are the numbers you attach to it to say, well, for it to swim in it, you need E. coli bacteria less than this number. And then so you do water quality monitoring, and there's an assessment process, and say, okay, now we have the data. Is it clean enough for swimming? And then if it turns out it's not, you have this impaired waters list. And then that puts it in line to have a cleanup plan and to hopefully figure out what needs to be done to get it back to swimmable. And so there's some permits that go into that for wastewater treatment plants, and then hopefully get it clean enough that you can take it off the list. And now what we found is that last part, there's a bottleneck, because the Clean Water Act only regulates things that come out of pipes from wastewater treatment plants. And so if we have a state like Iowa, where we're mostly rural, and what issues there are really need the cooperation of agriculture, then things get kind of backed up. And so they don't want to be adding more things to the list, so there's some resistance. So we have this water's in need of further investigation, and the credible data law that we don't actually want to look at the data that you collect, and we don't want to set numeric criteria for nutrients, because then we'd have to regulate the point sources, and they can't afford it, and we have this rebuttable presumption, so we're not even really sure what the designated use is. So it just gets all backed up to the point where you don't really know what's going on, because ultimately the law was built to deal with a certain set of things, and other things are slipping through the cracks. So we're left with oftentimes a lot of confusion and about what water worry are we even talking about. So have a little quiz for you. If I am paddling in the river and I accidentally tip my canoe and I swallow a mouthful of water, which of these things should I be worried about? Can I get a show of hands? Who thinks nutrients? Nitrogen and phosphorus. Okay. Who thinks sediments? Who thinks pesticides? Who thinks waterborne illnesses? Okay, a lot of folks, waterborne illnesses. Who thinks PFAS, the polyfluorinated alkaline substances?
I think it sounds like I should worry about that.
It does sound worrisome. Well, a lot of other folks are equally confused about which of these to worry about. I saw this article in the Des Moines Register a while ago about a couple who stopped paddling the Raccoon River because they were concerned about nitrates, and I was like, hold on now, is that really what they should be worried about? And looked into this and found that really are these only the waterborne illnesses. So a lot of these are chronic health issues, so that if you drink a glass of water a day with high nitrate levels in it, you might be at higher risk for some cancer. But if you're just swallowing a mouthful of water, none of these are going to have any impact, except for if you get sick with Giardia or a norovirus or something in the water because some animal or pooped in it, or there was a sewer leak upstream or whatever. Yes, question?
What about the brain-eating amoeba?
Ooh, glad you asked. We'll get right to it. I'll skip ahead here. Yeah, so that was in the news. The brain-eating amoeba, the Naegleria fowleri. We had our first case in Iowa, a Missouri man recreating in the Lake of Five Fires. Nebraska also had their first case. So it's scary because it's something where they really have very limited treatment options. Most people who get it die, but it's also extremely rare. Again, this is our first case. I think in Iowa, I think there's only been like 54 cases in the past 50 years, 50 or 60 years in the U.S. So it's still very rare. Nebraska also had their first case, and it's also something where we can't do a lot about it. It's naturally occurring. I guess the one thing where voters might be able to do something about it is to the extent that we can address climate change. Because this is, they see more cases when the water temperatures are higher. So as we see warmer weather, warmer water, there might be more of this. And if we can keep the temperature down, that would be the one thing. But I'd say the thing we ought to worry about more is other waterborne illnesses, anything fecal, anything. So E. coli is a fecal indicator bacteria. So that's kind of the easy to measure proxy for anything else that might be in the water that a sick cow or a sick person, could pass on to you. So the cryptosporidium, the giardia, the norovirus, the hepatitis E, all that stuff. And there are some pathogenic strains of E. coli as well, but most of them are harmless. So anyway, we've been monitoring 15 streams in Story County, and sometimes they dry up. But so for example, this year, 12 out of the 13 sites that we measured exceeded the standard, and one of our 2 lake beaches. So what we're seeing is that really the impaired waters list is the tip of the iceberg. There was a lot of smaller creeks that just weren't being tested, and that this is a really widespread problem.
So did folks decide not to swim there? somebody posted?
At the lakes, at the public beaches, they do, yes. So between Memorial Day and Labor Day, I think they test once a week, and they'll put up a sign if it exceeds. And the rivers, they can't do that. And a lot of the rivers, we're only testing once a month. So this is something that voters could potentially do something about. In our cities, stormwater is, we see very high levels of E. coli in stormwater. So the standard is 235. We've measured in some storm sewer outlets 53,200 in this particular one. And now a lot of storm sewers go into these treatment ponds, and they do a pretty good job of removing the E. coli and other contaminants. But we also have a lot of older neighborhoods that predate those ordinances, and so are going directly into the creek. I was kind of excited about the infrastructure bill, because this seemed like an opportunity to address this, because the E. coli is probably coming from one of two places. It could be all the animal poop that's getting flushed in, the raccoons in the storm sewer, all the dog dew that folks didn't pick up that's sitting near the curb and gets washed into the storm sewers after a rain. The other option is we have a lot of old sewer pipes. I was seeing some parts of Ames, they're just getting around to fixing them. They're 60 years old. We know they have this problem of, they call it I&I, water getting into the pipes and causing problem at the plant. And if water can get into these old pipes, sewage could potentially leak out. So we're still kind of working on finding ways to test for that and be sure if that's an issue or not. But if either of those things are issues, then that's more funding for fixing up our aging sewer and storm sewer infrastructure could be a good thing. In rural areas, of course, we have a lot of livestock. I caution people not to be too quick to blame just because you have a lot of livestock manure. If it's applied at the right time and incorporated into the soil, there's relatively little chance for it to get into rivers. But it's not always applied at the right time or in the right place. And so we have seen studies where they've traced pathogen genes, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, E. coli in rural streams back to a livestock source. So this is something where I think there is an opportunity to pay attention to how we manage manure and what the rules are, and see if there's some ways to keep manure from being applied on frozen soil and that kind of thing. All right, next issue. What should if you like fishing, and who doesn't like fishing, what should I worry about if I want to have better fishing in my lake or stream? So how many say nutrients? How many say sediment? Pesticides? Waterborne illnesses? PFAS? All right, so I'm thinking for these, the first three, the waterborne illnesses, I guess there was a case where a whole bunch of carp just got what was it?
Coronavirus, probably. They were wearing masks.
Was it hepatitis or something? Well, there was, in Storm Lake, there was some kind of a disease that was going around
It was herpes.
Herpes, that was it, yes. There was a herpes outbreak that killed a bunch of carp. So now I'm going to have to amend this. But for the most part, high E. coli, you're not going to worry too much about the fish. PFAS, I don't think we've seen any impacts. But these first three, and sediment is one we haven't talked about. Now this is something that we've known about and been working on for a long time. We've back since the Dust Bowl, and I think there's been a lot of progress to control erosion on farm fields. But still, sometimes we'll see days like this. This was a picture I collected in Ballard Creek in Cambridge. So sometimes you do see chocolate-colored water. This was after a 4-inch rain, I think, up near Roland. And so even though this is a very flat landscape, we have a whole bunch of soil washing through here if you get enough rain.
When you take a water sample, do you just dip in the water, or do you go down low?
Just dip in the water because we don't want to stir up the bottom. And construction site erosion can also be a problem. I think that this was This might have been something related to the construction on the new stadium. We had a group of folks, including some of our Skunk River paddlers back here, who were on this expedition. We were hauling a bunch of trash. You see some tires, a shopping cart out of there, but at the same time we're seeing probably the bigger impact on the fish is this stream bank erosion. And we have a big challenge with the stream bank erosion because we are dealing with the legacy of the Dust Bowl and of the breaking of the Prairie. So there is a lot of our streams in Iowa have a whole bunch of sediment that washed in 100 years ago, and now there's this very loose soil, and it creates when the water hits that, it can create these canyons. So, as much concern as there was about the trees being removed for that flood control project on South Duff and Ames, I think that sometimes the only way to solve this is you either wait for the bank to cave in, or you bring a backhoe in. And so sometimes there is some benefits to taking out the trees so you can reshape that bank and create the floodplain again. So another issue with fish and aquatic life is pesticides. I think a lot of people picked up on that. So there was an interesting study by the Geologic Survey where they looked at streams across the Midwest, and one of the things they measured was pesticides. Relatively few of the streams had pesticide levels that would be a problem for fish directly, but over half of the agricultural streams and 3/4 of the urban streams had levels of pesticides that would be toxic to invertebrates. Things like the mayflies, otherwise known as fish food. So, and one of their sites was in Story County, I think near Zeering, a tributary of East Indian Creek, and they found pyrethroid pesticides in the sediments at levels high enough to be a problem for the sensitive critters. So this is something that I think is a bigger issue than I had previously realized. We use a lot of herbicides in Iowa, so 80% of our agricultural streams had herbicide levels high enough to be toxic to algae. And generally we don't want a lot of algae in our streams, but there are good and bad, and it can disrupt the balance. And so I don't know. It was I don't really know what the consequences of that would be. So this is something that voters can have an influence over in some ways. So this year, EPA banned an insecticide, chloropyrethos. The main reason they did that was for worker safety, because it is something that's quite toxic to farm workers, but it's also something that's very toxic to fish. So this was, something that may have some benefits for aquatic life. And on the voluntary side, I think there's a lot that can be done with integrated pest management. I remember working in a nursery where they kind of sprayed prophylactically, and I think there's I know other places are actually checking and seeing what bugs are there before they spray. And so I think there's a lot that can be done with this that would benefit both water quality and protect our bees and butterflies. All right, so assuming there are fish in the lake or river to catch, what should I worry about if I want to eat them? How many people say nutrients? How many say sediment? How many say pesticides?
Yeah.
Waterborne illnesses? PFAS. All right, so these, I would say, the pesticides and the PFAS. So the nutrients, like nitrogen changes forms readily. So, you might have high nitrate in the creek, but then in the fish, it's going to be in the form of protein, probably. The waterborne illnesses, just like, you got to be careful about salmonella in your chicken when you're handling raw meat. As long as you're cooking your fish properly, don't need to worry about the E. coli in the stream. But there are pesticides and a lot of new chemicals like these PFAS that do accumulate in fatty tissue and make their way up the food chain. So when DNR does post some advisories for some lakes and rivers in Iowa, and those have typically been on these industrial contaminants like PCBs and mercury. So I would say most fish in Iowa, most places are safe to eat. And even where they have these advisories, it's like no more than 1 meal a week of the bigger fish. So it's, I'd say, keep fishing, and usually it's safe to eat the fish. But an interesting story. My dad is in the Boundary Waters right now, and once he likes to go to Hungry Jack Lake. And out of curiosity, once I looked up some water quality data for Hungry Jack Lake, and it turns out that the Boundary Waters is downwind from the Rust Belt. And so they actually have higher mercury levels in the Boundary Waters than in the South Skunk River. And, the amount of mercury in a bass fillet from the South Skunk River was on par with the tuna that you get from the supermarket. So, I think people sometimes worry too much about the fish, and they're actually fine. Yeah?
What about, a lot of people like carp, not me, but they're bottom feeders.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be where a lot of awful things are?
Yes, and I think that is one where, when they issue advisories, it's for the higher up in the food chain, like the largemouth bass and walleye, and then also the carp that are the bottom feeders, and the catfish. So, yep. DNR also tests for some of these organochloride pesticides, most of which have been banned, I think, or all of them. Yeah, they've all been banned, and they're not finding them anymore. But they used to be an issue in fish, and of course the eagles eating the fish, and that whole story. But yeah, those were banned, and now the eagles have made a comeback. But we are, PFAS is just kind of these perfluoroalkylated substances. I think that's right. So these are non-stick chemicals, so you see them on non-stick cookware, on fast food packaging, on microwave popcorn containers, and really they're just finding them everywhere. They're
on rain gear.
Huh?
On rain gear.
Rain gear, yep. Yeah, anywhere they need kind of water repellent, and because they're water repellent, they persist in the environment, and they don't change forms, and so they're just finding these in a lot of places, and finding them in the water, finding them in people who eat microwave popcorn, finding them in immigrant communities who eat a lot of local fish that they're catching. So this is one where I'm not sure yet if these are if we're going to see these in Iowa fish, but this is something that's just emerging, and something to keep on our radar. All right, another issue, drinking water. So if you have a private well, what should you be worried about? How many think nutrients? How many think sediments? Well, yeah, you get. I used to work at a building where, yes, we had the rust in the water, and according to the lab, it was safe to drink. I didn't want to drink it. It did not look or taste appetizing. How many say pesticides? Waterborne illnesses. And PFAS. Okay. So these, I would say everything except sediments, again, without exception for the rusty water. But especially nutrients and waterborne illnesses. Some of these, I think, can be an issue. We've seen some places have an issue, some not. So the pesticides and the PFAS are one where we maybe don't know enough yet, but for the nutrients and the E. coli, we do know. This was from a study by the Environmental Working Group. These are private wells in Iowa contaminated with nitrated bacteria. So it's, it can be pretty widespread, and especially in northwest and in northeast Iowa. This is where we have limestone close to the surface. So you can have sinkholes and caves, and that can provide a pathway for contaminants to get from the land surface into the groundwater. In our area, we may be more concerned about old wells that weren't sealed properly and are providing a pathway that if your neighbor had one, that you might have a contaminated well, but your neighbor further down wouldn't. So it's a little bit more spotty in central Iowa whether wells are contaminated or not. And this is one where I think it's a big concern because the onus is on the landowner to test their water and to do something about it. So I think I know I heard something recently about more funding for private well testing and cleanup. So I think this has been something that voters and lawmakers can do something about, but definitely something that needs to be paid more attention to. Okay, now if you're on municipal tap water, which should you be worried about? How many say nutrients? How many say sediments? Pesticides? Waterborne illnesses? And PFAS. All right. So the PFAS are one that this is a pretty new development that we started testing and started seeing them in some communities in Iowa, including Ames. I think it was below the health advisory levels, but still the fact that they were seeing them at all is a concern. And so I know City of Ames water plant is doing some testing, looking at trying to figure out which wells have these and where they might have come from. I know their firefighting foam is one source of these, so I think that was one possibility of. So this is one where I think there's where we need to be learning more and where we'll be finding more about it. But probably the bigger one to be concerned with is nutrients, because that is one where we know that they are present. Now, drinking water treatment plants are required to mix from different sources or to treat the water, like in the case of the Des Moines Water Works, to keep nitrate below that 10 milligram per liter threshold. But there has been some research coming out that nitrate can lead to elevated cancer risks at lower levels. So, and this is another case where I think where regulators are a little hesitant to look into this and to change the standards, because then, we're already having trouble meeting that 10 milligram per liter standard. How the heck are we going to get down to, 1.4?
Your local water to get is it necessary to do that, or is it recommended, or?
And it really depends, because this is one that I found varies quite a bit. So at my office on the west side of Ames, we got our water from Xenia Rural Water District. It indirectly comes from a well that's driven near the Des Moines River, and so that had pretty high nitrate levels, 5 milligrams per liter. Still well below that standard, but maybe some concerns with long-term exposure. But then my house in Ames, Ames has the good fortune to have wells drilled into this buried sand and gravel deposit, and there's something going on with the chemistry and the microbes that are, even though the South Skunk River has 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate, by the time it gets to the well fields, it's no longer detectable. So we're kind of lucky that we're not seeing high nitrate levels in our Ames city water, but this is one where it's very varies from place to place. So depending on where you're located and where you get your water, and I think most of Story County, it seems like, is in pretty good shape with nitrate in drinking water, but other communities may have issues. And let's see. Oh, again, the waterborne illnesses. Cities disinfect drinking water with chlorine. So even if there's bacteria in the water source, by the time it gets to your tap, generally not an issue. Oh, yeah, I forgot this. I skipped a slide way back here. So some of you may have caught this, with the recreation. There is a link between nutrients and algae blooms. And so, if you tip your canoe in a lake that looks like grain paint, yes, these blue-green algae can produce toxins. That there's been cases of people's dogs getting sick and dying, of people getting sick from these, of fish kills. So there can be a connection between nutrients and algae blooms that are a concern for recreation, and certainly are no fun to go swimming or paddling when the lake looks like pea soup. Also a concern for drinking water. the kind of classic case was Toledo, Ohio, gets its water from Lake Erie. They had a big algae bloom, high levels of microcystin, and they had to like go on bottled water for a month. So we're now seeing this in Iowa this year. The Des Moines Water Works was unable to use water from the Des Moines River because of high microcystin levels in Saylorville Lake. So yeah, increasingly this is a concern. I know there's been in Ames, you know, one of the things we're trying to do is keep from getting algae blooms in Ada Hayden Lake. The connection there is a little bit less direct because Ada Hayden is kind of an overflow source of water that we can use to divert water into the Skunk River when the Skunk River goes dry, and that seeps through the sand and gravel down to the well field. So yeah, so I'm not sure how big a risk that actually is in Ada Hayden, but certainly from a standpoint of everyone who likes to boat on that lake, would rather not have algae blooms. So the reason I go through this is that all these different issues is that so much of our focus in Iowa has been on nutrients, the nutrient reduction plan, nitrogen and phosphorus, and you know, so what I found working on Iowa Creek watershed is that we don't always make the connection between, you know, how does that affect people locally? We know that if we can reduce the amount of nitrogen going down to the Gulf, that'll benefit shrimpers, but you know, we don't always make the connection for how it matters locally. You know, and so sometimes when we're too focused on, it also makes a difference for the solutions. So some of the conservation practices that we use, so this is a wood chip bioreactor that went in as part of our project in Boone County, and it's a very cost-effective way to remove nitrogen from drainage water. And so, you know, we did have some check boxes for nutrients by, you know, there's a connection to algae blooms, there's a connection to drinking water in some places, but you know, this is really a one-trick pony. You know, you can install a whole bunch of bioreactors and saturated buffers and not be making a difference for, you know, not be taking the stream off the impaired waters list for E. coli or not affecting pesticides. There are some other practices that address multiple issues, and so wetlands and prairie strips, extended rotations using alfalfa and small grains as part of the rotation. They've documented pesticide and reductions in erosion control. So, you know, not to knock bioreactors, we absolutely need more, but I think this is an issue where we need to be, you know, having the conversations about what are the local impacts, what does water quality really mean in a given lake or river, what does it mean for local people, so that then we can make sure that, you know, that when the problem is solved, we haven't solved, you know, the nitrate problem, and now we got to deal with the E. coli problem. You know, really, so as a voter, I'd be, you know, looking for people who can kind of see the big picture of all Iowa's many soil and water challenges and be looking for, you know, ways to address more than one at once. Questions?
Yeah, I want to be clear. I take away the idea that if the water you're drawing to drink comes out of an aquifer or a gravel deposit, it probably doesn't have nitrates in it?
Sometimes, yeah, it depends. I think, and I think we're just kind of lucky with Ames that just the chemistry of it is such that it's filtered out. But yeah, there are in a lot of places where if you have your wells that are close to a river, there is a chance for river water to seep into that aquifer and to contaminate it. So that, you know, so yeah, in the city of Boone, you know, there is nitrate contamination from those wells. You know, so it's really location dependent. Yeah.
Can you say something about bottled water, its source, and regulations?
I can say that bottled water is typically less regulated than tap water, and so switching to bottled water is not necessarily going to give you better results. And then there's all the environmental consequences from the plastic and.
So you're drinking from a bottle.
It's what I was given.
Good marketing.
So, is there an issue in Story County with respect to water quality?
Yes. Yeah. Most Story County streams have high levels of E. coli. So if you're gonna, so pack your hand sanitizer when you go, if you go canoeing or fishing. It would be, yeah.
I live very near the Skunk River, and I see people throwing sticks to their dogs and having their dogs go into the water. Is that safe?
You know, I really haven't, I don't, you know, I guess potentially if there's, you know, any place there's animal waste in the water, you know, your dog could be getting sick from another dog, or maybe, you know, I'm sure there are raccoon viruses that could be passed to a dog. So it's kind of hard to say how big a risk that is, but yeah, I guess just, yeah.
Are you able to say anything about the CO2 sequestration pipelines? Is that a risk to our water sources, or more of a soil risk?
The concerns that I had heard was a safety concern that I know that they had to. There was a leak in some other part of the country, and you know, in this cloud of CO2 that billowed out, and you know, and just like if you're breathing into a paper bag and you get too much CO2, that can suffocate you. So that, I think that was the concern, of the safety concern, and were there enough safety precautions, or was the pipeline far enough away from schools and communities? So that was kind of the main concern I'd heard about. I can't really think of what the water quality impact would be from carbon dioxide. You know, the other concern I'd heard about was the impact on landowners, and you know, the compaction of the soil during development, and then the eminent domain concerns about you know, compensation and taking of land value.
What's the linkage between soil erosion and water pollution?
The linkage is that soil that's washed out on the land is going to end up in the lake or the river, and you know, so if you have muddy water, there are some kinds of fish and aquatic critters that are not going to be able to see to find food. That is going to cover up fish nesting spots. There's, well, like the mayflies that trout eat, you know, like to live on rocks, and so if those rocks are covered up with soil, so that's. How
about nitrates and atrazine and that sort of thing washing into the water? Is that a source of pollution or not?
Yes. So you know, and the kind of the two ways that things can get into the water is, you know, if it washes off a hill slope, so that's runoff, and so that's especially a concern if you've got areas close to a river and steeper slopes. And then in our part of Iowa, the other way is through drainage tiles. So we have this system of underground pipes, and you know, nitrate is the water-soluble form of nitrogen, and so at times I've heard it described as a, you know, it's really an issue with the crop rotation and with the timing that you know, you have times a year where the soil is warming up and you have nothing growing, and so nitrogen is turning into water-soluble forms, and if there's no plants there to take it up, it's going to get flushed out when it rains. It can go into those underground pipes and make its way to the rivers. So,
does the runoff that goes into the creek find its way into the aquifer? I'm thinking about years ago, the city built a low-head dam in South River Valley Park. And after a long drought, it felt there was a need to recharge the aquifer because it was being drawn down. Does this runoff from the fields entering the stream percolate down into the aquifer and become a source of pollution to the aquifer?
In this case, no, and I think it's just a peculiarity of the. It's a reducing chemical environment, they call it, and so the water chemistry is such, and the microbes in the stream bed are such that for whatever reason, a lot of the nitrogen is removed by the time it gets down to that buried sand and gravel deposit. So I think we're just kind of lucky in Ames in that respect. In a lot of other places, there is concern about nitrate leaching from farmland down into the groundwater, and certainly we, going back to that map of all the private wells that have high nitrate levels, that's certainly a concern. Yes.
There's a citizen water quality testing, and did I understand you to say that the data from that can't be used? And if so, why is it being done?
It was.
You might want to repeat that question.
Oh, sure. There was a question about the citizen science program and why can't the water quality data be used. So the issue is it can't be used by the DNR for adding a water to the impaired waters list or making those kinds of decisions. So we've been trying to use that data that's collected for to educate the public and to help prioritize which streams we want to focus on, and to help get a better understanding of what the pollution sources are and what the solutions might be. So we're definitely using that data, but been kind of disappointed to find that DNR really has their hands tied as far as even when there are citizens, that they're only able to test maybe half the streams and 60% of the lakes in Iowa, and you'd think that citizens could help fill that gap, but there's this credible data law, and I don't know whether the motivation for that was, concerns about the quality of the data, or it was we don't really want to see no evil, hear no evil, kind of a thing. But that's been a disappointment. That so.
What you measure is what you do. So if we don't measure it, we don't have to do anything.
Yeah, so we were able to add the been monitoring Iowa Creek for a long time, and so that's now on the waters in need of further investigation list. So at least we're at least able to if you go on DNR's website, you'll see that yes, there was high E. coli levels, and then they have these asterisk of it's not official and blah blah blah. But at least we're raising awareness that there is an issue.
When you say we, you mean your group? So your group data is considered valid? Is that what I'm understanding?
So it was not they were not able to use it for officially, but they were able to at least put it on this special category of we can't use their data officially, but yeah.
So the American Rescue Plan gave $13 million to the county, and they've used a lot of it, not all of it. And one of the safe havens under ARPA is water projects, water and sewer projects. So do you have any thoughts about how this county had a few $1 million and didn't know what to do with? You might be able to apply productively to water issue?
Yeah, and the county's been a great partner. So we were able to get this water monitoring program going. So now, so we have, I think there's now a waiting list for the Story County Conservation for getting a kit to monitor streams all around the county. So I think that some of the funding for that project and the watershed signs as well came from a pipeline settlements. So and I'm not sure. I guess I haven't been following what happened with the American Rescue Plan, and if that's also been used for this, kind of water quality improvement projects in education. But certainly we've seen a lot of interest at the local level with Story County Conservation, with City of Ames. Yeah.
Do you have some suggestions what we can do to make our Iowa DNR more effective, citizen proactive?
They need more funding. They had their funding severely cut, and that was part of the explanation for why they no longer were able to support citizen science. And I think some of this is the framing too, that of saying that recreation and safe drinking water and fisheries are important to us as Iowans, and it's something that we expect. Because what I found with some of these projects is it gets framed as we need to do something about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, and if we don't get our act together, EPA is going to get on our case, so let's kind of show some progress, or we have an opportunity to get this grant if we get this group together and have a bunch of meetings. And, so it gets framed in this kind of way that, is hard to get people excited about, and then it sort of slips down the priority list. So I think if we can be a little bit more clear in the way we talk about it, of valuing clean water and healthy soil. Yeah?
Okay. The Iowa Creek was changed drastically in the last 4 years from going through AIDS. How did you feel about that? And, watching all those trees go away, it sounds like, and then all the rocks that came in, and you said, taking those sides down and putting rocks.
Yeah, so the question was about the construction on Iowa Creek, especially at South Death Avenue. I have mixed feelings about that. Certainly there was a loss of some trees and some forest habitat, and I think that there really should have been some more discussion about development along the floodplain earlier in the process that maybe could have avoided the need for that. But I think at the point where we're at, where we needed to control flooding, and I think what they did was a good solution, which was to reconnect the river to the floodplain, because you had this canyon situation where you have the trees up here and then these steep banks, and then so when the water level goes up, it goes way up out of its banks and it goes rushing down 5th Street. And so the solution that they did, I think once the plantings are established, it's going to be nice that you'll have prairie and wetland habitat. The river is reconnected to its floodplain, so that when you have a water level rise, it goes out over those lower banks. It slows the water, I think that's something that needs to happen in other rivers, that look like canyons, where sometimes the best solution is to do some earthwork, and I do have concerns about the trees being removed, and I understand people's being upset about that, but you have a situation where the damage was done long ago, when you had the Dust Bowl and all this sediment washed into the river valleys, and then you had developments and all this pavement and all this water rushing off the pavement, and so you have soft soil, rushing water, and it forms these canyons. And so at some point, the only way to get back to a natural state is either you got to wait for this riverbank to cave in, and sometimes you got a house on there, and so you can't let that happen, or you got to reshape it somehow. So it's a tricky thing.
Did they give the public much information as to what the plan was for that? Because I was clueless, and then all of a sudden I'm driving down Duck and said, "What happened to everything?" So completely devastated. I mean, we need to know these things before they go and river blow apart. Either I'm I mean, I think I'm pretty aware of what's going on, but I don't think that I was aware of what was happening until it was gone.
Are they gonna move up Iowa Creek along Brookside, try to do some more of this?
So the plan for Brookside Park, that's, Rick, can you speak to that, because you've been at those?
Don't recall, I thought they were gonna try to start on that this fall and winter,
You know, and the concern there was the steep banks, and erosion. So again, the idea was partly to do some things to redirect the currents away from the banks and to have less of a slope. And I know, I think the public, there's been some lessons learned, and so the public input process has been improved. I know some folks who were upset at the initial meetings were feeling like there was they were being heard, and that there were some better plans being proposed at the later meeting. So
See, we're very good at politics, even though you didn't want to be.
I found that it is inescapable. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've gotten our money's worth tonight. I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you very much.